Good afternoon. It's 2 o'clock, so we'll get started. Welcome, everybody, to today's webinar, Identifying Common Root Causes from Falls from Heights. I'm Chris Kane, CPWR's Executive Director, and I'm pleased to be here to introduce today's panelists. Fall safety has been a high priority topic for CPWR for many years, so we are excited to advance our efforts to improve awareness, understanding, and implementation of fall prevention and protection solutions to the construction industry by partnering with the ANSI Z359 Committee and others in the industry to learn more about the root causes of falls. In addition to being our webinar host, Jessica also takes the lead on our fall-related research to practice efforts and participation as an organizing partner of the OSHA CPWR NIOSH National Campaign to Prevent Falls in Construction. She's going to provide a very brief overview of this work before we hear from our main presenters. Thom Kramer is a principal at LJB Incorporated and is the ANSI Z359 Accredited Standards Committee Chairman. He initiated and chairs the ANSI Z359 Work from Heights Task Force that both Jeff and our second presenter, Jane Beaudry, is part of. Thom will review some of the current data we have on falls and identify where there are gaps in the information. After we hear from Thom, Jane Beaudry, Senior Health Safety and Environment Manager at Jacobs, will provide an overview of the new Fall Experience Survey developed by CPWR, the Work from Heights Task Force, and other industry partners. We'll take questions at the end of the webinar as time allows. A number of questions were received during the registration, and they will be addressed first, followed by live questions, which can be asked at any time in the question and answer box at the bottom right of your screen. And with that, I'll hand it over to Jessica to get us started. Jessica?
Thanks so much, Chris. I just want to, again, briefly talk about some of our work. As many of you know, we've done past webinars on Heights and, presented existing data and our outreach efforts. But I just, want to reiterate that falls kill. For those who don't know, they are continuously the #1 cause of construction fatalities. If you can see that just pulling this 2 years out, 2011 to 2017 comparison, they continue to remain the leading cause of fatalities. However, the number of fall fatalities did decrease by 12.6% between 2017 and 2018, from 389 to 340. So I did just want to point that out. And that sort of leads to my second point, which is that falls are preventable. We know that the solutions exist, so how do we increase uptake and appropriate use of those solutions on the job site? So at CPWR, we've undertaken a number of research efforts and outreach efforts, and then we've also developed a lot of resources, many of which are in support of the OSHA NIOSH CPWR National Campaign to Prevent Falls in Construction and the associated Stand Down Week, which is the main event of the campaign. And so for anyone unfamiliar, this campaign was started by our three organizations, CPWR, NIOSH, and OSHA in 2012, with the goal of raising awareness of fall hazards and solutions. And then the Stand Down event was conceived of by OSHA and added in 2014 as a way for contractors, workers, and other stakeholders to sort of just pause work and come together around fall safety on the job site. And so all of the resources that we've developed, both through the campaign and our other R2P work and research efforts, can be found on the website stopconstructionfalls.com. And we do have a slide at the end of this presentation with links to all of the various resources and data that we're going to be talking about. And on stopconstructionfalls.com, we have things like CPWR NIOSH co-branded infographics. We have annual hard hat stickers. I do a stand down plan showcasing ready-to-use activities every year for the stand down. We have numerous toolbox talks and pocket-sized hazard alert cards, videos, and on-demand webinars There's a written fall protection and rescue plan template that can be taken and used and adapted to your specific job site. And there's also a new section on stopconstructionfalls.com devoted to small contractors. The website also houses other campaign-related materials, as well as resources from OSHA, NIOSH, and other organizations. And I want to mention, in addition to our campaign efforts, CPWR also participates in a NORA Construction Sector Council Falls work group. They actually were responsible for contributing to the new section for small contractors. And we've more recently partnered with the ANSI Z359 Committee in a number of ways, including on this survey that you'll hear more about today. And the ANSI ASSP Z359 Committee, if you're not familiar, produces voluntary standards and guidance that respond to industry needs and focus on operational improvement, which brings us to our first presenter today, Thomas Kramer. And Thom, I will hand it over to you now.
Great. Thank you very much, Jess, for that opening, and thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your busy day. We always know that there's other things that you can be doing with your time, and we appreciate you dedicating it to protecting your workers at heights through this webinar. Also, a big shout-out to CPWR and especially Chris and Jessica for getting this webinar scheduled and allowing us to present this information. We think it's very valuable, and we appreciate all the partnerships that CPWR has in the industry to better protect our workers at heights. And then finally, a special thank you to Jane for co-presenting on this on me. I know we all have specific individuals in our lives that make us think in a different way that stretches us and makes us better. And Jane, I appreciate all the conversations that we've had leading up, and I look forward to all the others in the future. As Jessica indicated, these are the topics that I'm going to address before I hand it back over to Jane. We do have plenty of time at the end for questions and so forth, so please keep those coming in, and we'll make sure that we get it to as many of those as we can. So let me go ahead and advance to the next slide. So as far as what do we know, we know that when it comes to fatalities, we have a lot of good data, and I'll share what CPWR has taken from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and really crunched a lot of information to have. But we don't have a lot of information that gets into specific incident investigation information. And that's why I'm sharing this screen. If you're connected with me on LinkedIn, you'll know I posted this one just about a couple weeks ago. It was a fatality investigation that coworker Charlie Dressler of mine passed along to me, and it provides some great information. It's a very unfortunate circumstance because it was a result of a fatality, but you know, we can't change what happened in that situation. We can't bring that person back, but what we can do is we can learn from it. We can understand what happened, and we can try to prevent it from happening again. And so Daryl Johnson, who passed away that day, we can't bring him back, but the information that we have in here goes to preventing the next one. And so the challenge, though, is that we have in the spectrum of the data, we have the data that we have currently from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, plus we have this very, very specific information, but we don't have a lot in between. And the number of incident investigation reports that go to this level of detail, like we have in this report, and it's also a link is provided at the end, how do we get more of that? How do we get more items? Because when you read through this investigation, you start to identify things that at my facility I can start to do differently. And as chair of the Z359 Committee, I start to look at these investigations and I start to say, what interventions should we be programming into the Z359 standards to address this on a more national basis? And so that's what we're really focusing on here today is how do we get more good information, like is in this instant investigation report, so that we can prevent more fatalities or serious injuries in the futures. And so here's some of that data that I mentioned as far as the trending of the data. Now, you might look at the data and you see where we were at in 2007 and you see where we're at now in 2018. Now, of course, the BLS data, Bureau of Labor Statistics data, is always a year behind, so we'll be getting the 2019 data shortly. But here's the trend of the data. And you might look at the data and you look at it and say, well, wow, you know, we did some really good efforts back in 2008, 2009, 2010 to really drive those numbers down. How can we repeat that? Well, think about why those data went down. That was the Great Recession. And so a lot of people don't want to necessarily repeat what drove those numbers down. So how can we get safer at our job sites through proactive means, not just reduced amount of labor hours that are driving down the fatalities and so forth. And so that's what we're looking at right now is what can we do to affect this data. Primarily, I'm looking at it from the Z359 side, but then also the other stakeholders are always looking at it from their other perspectives. And so when we look at the data, we can break down construction and then also the other industries as far as where we have the fatalities. And again, construction is a significant contributor to that. Now, it isn't saying that there isn't fatalities elsewhere. As you can see, there's plenty of fatalities in other industries. But again, what we can do is we can start breaking this information down, getting it out to various industry groups, starting to understand, very similar to the incident investigation report that MSHA did on the link that we have at the end of the slides, to better understand what are the causal factors that we need to address moving forward. And then also, when we break down, we can look at it on the contractor side from a specialty contractor, construction of buildings, heavy highway, civil type projects, and you can see what the drivers are there. But again, what do we need to do to protect that person? So of the 218 fall fatalities by specialty trade contractors, my mind immediately goes, where were they not given a harness but they should have? Where they have a harness but they're not attached? Where are they attached but then something happens to the fall protection system? I see a lot of people like Dan Henn and Carl Heinlein in the industry. They send me fatality news clippings when they see them in the industry, but those news clippings tend to be very, very light on the details, or the news is so new that they don't have the specific details. And so it's something that we're constantly trying to figure out, how can we get more people engaged. So as we move on, as we move down, we can look at the fall fatalities by the type of construction. So again, I know that there was a couple questions that came in as far as how many are happening on residential structures versus other structures, and this provides a little bit of detail that helps provide that perspective. But again, we're not light on breaking the information down as far as where the person is, what the person was, what type of trade they were in, what type of construction they were doing, what type of industry they were in. But we need to start getting the information related to the types of fall protection systems they were or were not using to be better aligned with creating interventions through the Z359 standards and obviously through our own individual fall protection programs. The last slide here that I want to finish up with is just the number of fall fatalities in construction by primary source. So this is one item that historically, fall fatalities overall, 20% of all fall fatalities occur from a roof, and as you can see, that's very, very common in here. Ladders, very, very common, and also scaffolding. Structural steel is often another contributing factor, and non-moving vehicles. And so this is, again, data that's readily available from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, but how do we get that information taken to the next level? One item that I also want to share is comparing us to other countries. One of my other volunteer jobs is president of the International Society for Fall Protection, and what that allows me to do is network with folks in other countries to better understand what are the challenges that they're dealing with and how can we better incorporate some of their best practices and programs into what we're doing here in the United States. And I had the pleasure of presenting last year at the London Work at Heights seminar, and I was doing some comparison of the data because I had always heard that the policies and implementation has always been stronger in the UK. And so what we see here is just a chart comparing the United States and the United Kingdom in various ways. You know, what's the difference in our size of economies by gross domestic product? How's that gross domestic product focused on new construction? Then how do we do on the safety side? And you can see the total workplace fatalities and the total construction fatalities and the total fall fatalities. And while there's slight differences in how we measure our numbers, we're talking about the slight differences could be in the single-digit percentages versus significant differences. And when you look at the numbers, that despite having an economy that is in some cases 7 to 10 times larger than the United Kingdom, we have 33 to 34% times the number of fatalities. In 2016, when the United Kingdom only had 25 fall fatalities, the United States had 849. And so that's why I look at it and say, what can we be doing differently in order to better protect our workers at heights? And it's not as simple as just taking the United Kingdom's regulatory framework and bringing it over here to the United States. There's a lot of cultural items that just wouldn't be effective. But what can we model after some of what they're doing and apply it to us? One of the links that you'll see at the end of the show or the end of the slides that Jessica mentioned was a link to what they call their work at heights regulations. So one interesting thing is that the United Kingdom calls it work at heights regulations versus we call it walking, working surface regulations and fall protection regulations. So that's something I can get into a little bit more detail later if somebody has a question. But then also, they do a lot better details as far as finding out of those 25 fall fatalities, what were the circumstances and what is how does the industry need to address it. Now, in having nearly 800 fall fatalities versus 25, obviously that's a little easier. But what we're trying to do in this survey is know what does the United Kingdom do to get some of those lessons learned out of those fatalities that can be applied to the industry. We're looking at doing something similar. One other link that is provided at the resources slide later on in the program is also a link to what they call their all-party parliamentary group on working at heights. They actually have what we would, probably the analogy would be a congressional subcommittee. They have an all-party parliamentary group over there that is focused on work at heights. And so they prepared a fantastic report that looked at work at heights. And I think a lot of the items that they suggested in there are items that we can very easily apply to our own industries over here and our own programs over here. And so that's what I would encourage you to do as you take a look at that data. So one last item from a statistics standpoint that I think is very, very sobering is that for the past 9 years, fall protection has been the #1 violation citation for OSHA in construction. And as you can see, 6 of the top 10 have some aspect of fall protection related to them. So this is something troubling that when I look at since 1995, and I use 1995 as a benchmark since that's when Subpart M 1926, the construction fall protection regulation came out. Since 1995, the number of fall fatalities has significantly increased, I think about 27%, versus overall workplace fatalities decreasing 17%. And that's despite having more regulations, more ANSI standards, more citations, more money spent on equipment, more resources dedicated to when it comes to working at heights, and yet the fall fatalities continue to rise. And it's something that, as chair of the Z359 committee, I don't consider us successful until we can start driving down that number. So in the end, this is our attempt at learning more so that we can take some great data from the survey and allow us to make better decisions as we create the ANSI standards. One item that I do want to share is from another data. We do have these fatality assessments and control evaluations reports that are very widely available. Now, the data range here is quite broad, so you always have to keep that in mind as you're looking at the data. But it's very similar to what we were able to pull off of these FACE report data. So if you've ever read these FACE reports, there's a lot of good information in there. And how can we create that same level of information from that? We knew that in working with the Bureau of Labor Statistics through CPWR that it would take some while to maybe get some better data that BLS would report, or the states reporting on some of their fatalities and so forth. It would be a challenging time to pull that back and start to get better data. And so this was a conversation that probably started over a year ago with Jessica and I, where she suggested, why don't we do a less scientific survey to try to get some more information that we can start doing something with right now. I don't often like to say this, but sometimes something is better than nothing, and I think this is exactly the case. Now, if I'm out in the field and you ask me to look at this fall protection system, I'll likely not say that something is better than nothing, because I think a lot of cases that something of the fall protection system might give the worker a false sense of security. But I think this was a great idea by Jessica, and I applaud her for bringing this forward and really running with this throughout the entire situation to bring this to light. And I'm really, really excited not only about the survey hitting the streets, but also more importantly, seeing the results as we start to go through there. So again, as we look at the gaps of information, we're trying to better understand what are the common underlying causes of these. And it's never just one thing, especially in these fall incidents. There's never just one thing that happens. But as I think to some of the basics of quality that I learned from studying Edward Deming, there's a lot of factors. Most of them are really under the auspices of the employer that they can change relative to their procedures, their processes, their supervision, their training of the employees to be better, to better set us up for success when they're out there in the field working at heights. And that's what we're really trying to look at is from these items, from these gaps of information, what can then we put in the ANSI Z359 standards or incorporate into other procedures and processes that, especially the ones that CPWR does, in order to make sure that we set our organizations up for success when they're working at heights. One last item that I want to address is just the ANSI Z359 Work at Height Task Force. Who is on this, you might be asking? There's approximately 26 members. Some of them are full committee members from the Z359 committee, and then there are some that aren't full committee members, but they're still interested stakeholders, health and safety professionals, folks like Jane, that have said, you know what, this is something that I'm passionate about and something that I want to look at. And the interesting thing is this subcommittee, it's a subcommittee just like we have a variety of subcommittees on the ANSI Z359, but this one is focused more on identifying new data sources to inform future committee standards and recommendations. So it's not tasked with creating standards. It's tasked with getting better information so we can make better decisions as an ANSI Z359 committee. So rather than focusing on the internal standards, this subcommittee is focused on efforts to acquire better data, more clearly identify trends, case studies, interventions that must be addressed by the Z359 Fall Protection Code. And then one last item, just with the goals of the survey before I pass it over to Jane. Really, we're just trying to learn about the underlying causes of falls in order to create the relevant resources as part of the fall prevention campaign and the stand down, improve the outreach by CPWR and what they're putting out in the industry, influence the future of research on fall safety. We can use some of this, and NIOSH is also on this subcommittee, so we can have them take it and figure out where there needs to possibly be research in the future. Obviously, I'm very excited about how it's going to inform the ANSI standards and what are the interventions and core elements of a fall protection program that we can talk about in the ANSI Z359.2 standard, and then finally share the data with the industry to improve the collective fall prevention efforts. We often hear hear stories about fatalities and tragic circumstances about somebody. But rather than having those anecdotal circumstances, how can we start to get a broader sense of what the data is like and what we can be doing to better protect the workers at heights? And so that's one item that I'm really excited to be partnering with Jane. She brings a very different passion that I have when it comes to working at heights and a different background. And I think the combination as far as what we do provides us a broader view as far as how to better protect our workers at heights. So with that, Jane, I'm going to pass it over to you. And you can take us through the survey, and then we'll come back together at the end and answer some questions. So, Jane, on to you.
So this is Jessica. I actually have to chime in. I apologize to everyone, but I jinxed us before we got started saying we weren't going to have technical difficulties. Jane got disconnected, so, I hope that she's able to get on. We would love to hear from Jane because she has so many great insights on this. But Thom, do you want to continue presenting on this survey, or do you want me to jump in and cover these slides until Jane gets back on?
Yeah, absolutely. I can continue on, and just feel free to jump in when Jane gets reconnected so we can have her share. So absolutely.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Well, back to me. As they say, Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither was this technology, so we are going to keep on going. So this is not Jane, this is Thom Kramer. So I'll talk briefly now about the survey questions, the timeline, taking the survey, and then also we'll finish it up with some relevant resources to take you through on this. So about the survey, so it's currently in a draft format. We're still in the process of finalizing some items. We've taken some of the feedback from the Z359 National Work at Heights Task Force. We've taken it from the NORA construction sectors group. So we've gotten a lot of different perspectives. And, you know, the way I like to think about this is the first time we're doing this. This isn't the first time that CPWR has done a survey, but this is the first time that we've done one relative to working at heights. And so we're excited about what information we're going to get, but we also realize that this is just the first step, and there's going to be continuous efforts to improve this process and try to get richer data. And so while we're excited about the results we're going to get, we also realize that we're going to have some improvement that we're going to have to do in order to make sure that we tailor this information. We're estimating that this survey is going to take 15 to 20 minutes, and so this isn't something that it's a quick, short, you know, like an employee satisfaction type email where you're trying to get some basic information. This is something where we're really looking to individuals who have some vast experience as far as you know, having been on site where there was a serious injury or a fatality, or they've been involved in an incident investigation. So we're trying to make sure that we're not trying to limit who does this by the amount of time, but we just want to realize that we want dedicated people who are going to give us great information for this. We have the questions prioritized, so learn about the fall experience. There is an anonymous aspect to this, and so this isn't going to be traced, and that's something that CPWR is very, very proud about. They pride themselves in trying to make sure that they protect the folks that are out there that are sharing this valuable information, and so this will be anonymous. And there is an option, though, to complete a second separate survey that again is decoupled from this primary survey to collect contact information confidentiality or in a confidential way. And so if you would like to have some deeper discussions with Jessica or others about these circumstances, please know that you are going to be able to provide that information. And when we say take the survey as many times as you want, we don't mean the same information. Don't use a survey to input the same information more than once. But unfortunately, many of you have more than one experience when it comes to a serious injury or fatality, and obviously you would need to take the survey multiple times associated with that. We realize as we use this information that there's a lot of information that we have to pull back on as far as understanding, and we realize that there might be some repetitive information. It's our job to try to tease that out. And obviously the data experts at CPWR, that's one of their jobs, is to see how we can best use this moving onto in the future. So when we get to the fall experience surveys, well, we're first going to start out with what type of work do you do? Is that from an industry standpoint, where are you at? That's just a basic information, because then there are going to be certain questions that are going to give you that are going to help guide the subsequent questions. So obviously, you know, what kind of industry segment are you involved with is another item that could be included. Have you been involved in or witnessed or investigated falls from heights? You know, if you say no, the survey ends. So it's pretty straightforward relative to that. Most of you are going to be giving more information, and so we're going to capture the rest of the information as we move on. So the next series of questions that we're going to start to learn more about that fall incident that they were involved in, witnessed, or investigated, or you remember the best, because now what we're trying to do is we're trying to capture that information so that we can classify it. If you remember what the Bureau of Labor Statistics has, is they typically only look at you know, is it a fall from a roof? Is it a fall from another walking working surface, from a ladder, from a scaffolding, non-moving vehicle, from structural steel? They have a lot of breakdown, but then they really don't get into other type of information. And so we're looking at, with these questions, getting a deeper level of information, such as what height did the fall occur. Now, there is a lot of good statistical data on that right now, but we want to obviously have the height related to the incident that you're speaking of. The medical care is obviously important, because that'll give us some idea as far as the severity associated with a fall. And then finally, if it was a non-fatal fall, how was the individual who fell rescued? And so giving some information that starts to inform a lot of items. I know from the data I've seen that we're typically not seeing necessarily a significant number of fatalities associated with the rescue aspect, but I think informing us as far as how people are being rescued will help us develop the rescue sections primarily in the ANSI Z359.2 section on rescue. So we're continuing to get more information in these next questions, just looking at the task, because one thing that I always try to emphasize when I'm out there in the field is that, you know, a hazard is important, but the task that the worker is doing is more important, because it's really understanding what the task the worker is doing. And a hazard without a task really isn't a hazard. And the task and the way that I create the solution has to be very, very based on the task that the worker is doing, or I could give them the fanciest fall protection system, but it won't necessarily be beneficial for them. And so we want to better understand what the task that they're doing, and then obviously what type of fall protection is involved with the solution. Now we're going to get into some cause-related questions. So we want to, again, try to get to that deeper level, and this is why I think the survey is going to take longer, because there's a lot of processing that needs to happen and a lot of reflection back on the circumstance. So again, this isn't something that you're going to be able to rip through this survey in a period of just a couple of minutes. There's going to be a significant amount of time that we want you to spend reflecting on these to make sure that it happens. And I know we had a question that had come on during the items as far as, you know, the different causes of falls. And what I've typically found in all the incidents that I've investigated is there's never just one item related to the fall. There's always these many causal factors that if we could have taken out one of them, we might have been able to prevent that fall. But when they all accumulated together, caused the tragic circumstance. Some other cause-related items is getting into the training for the person. So we want to reference some of the common training programs that are out there, the OSHA 10, the OSHA 30, the EM 385, competent person that's mentioned. I think it's in section chapter 21 of EM 385, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers manual. We want to understand about the person, you know, at the time, you know, who did the individual work for. Again, we're starting to get all these causal-related items so we can start to better understand the interventions that we have to implement to better protect the worker at height. And item number 17 is always an item that I have a lot of discussions about when we're out there in the field. One of the challenges that I always have in my mind as I'm talking to the person out there in the field is a person doing a JHA or JSA when it comes to working at heights right before the task. And so we say we have a task that's going to take us from Monday through Friday. We show up Monday morning and we go through our JHA, JSA to do the work. When it comes to other forms of PPE, like gloves or hard hats or safety shoes, those are very easy. We can implement those right away and we're ready to go. The challenge is that if you need to protect those workers from heights and you don't have the right scaffolding, or you don't have the right aerial lift, or if you don't have the right scissor lift, or if you don't have the right anchorages, or if you don't have a rescue program, are you still proceeding with that work even though you might not be best protecting that worker at height? And until we get to that level of planning associated with the fall protection system, I don't think we'll be protecting our workers. And so I'm really excited to see what kind of detail we're going to get into question 17 and how we might be able to better understand the circumstances of the falls when it relates to that. Then we want to obviously get into the consequences. Now there's going to be consequences related to just a variety of factors. And so we want to try to look at all those items that might be presented there. And as you'll see with most of the questions, there's very often going to be an other category that will allow you to provide a deeper level of information. And as you see with question 20, there's actually going to be open-ended items that you can feel free to, or not that you feel free, but we would encourage you to provide additional detail to make sure that we're addressing those as much as possible. Continue on. Then we'll get into some items talking about overall experiences. These are taking into consideration not just the experience, but of any and all fall incidents that they've been involved with, witnessed, or investigated. So what are other items that you're seeing that we need to better understand about and better apply to address our fall protection programs? And so this, again, is something that this isn't simply going to be a 30-second answer and you move on to the next one, but there's going to be a lot of processing, again, a lot of reflection that we're going to be asking the survey takers. And so even though this is going to go out to probably thousands, if not tens of thousands of people, we realize that that the length of this is probably going to limit the number of people that do it. We realize that, but we still think that it's going to give us a lot better information than what we have, a lot more granularity than what we have from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And then as we finish up, there's going to be a couple of different, more of a scaling type question when it comes into some of these items, and so you can give some different areas where it's a never, occasionally, frequent, or always, just so we can better understand where do these certain areas item fall. The one I'm really excited about is that second one on prevention through design. As Jessica talked about at the beginning, and so did Chris, these falls are preventable. I would say more than 95%, and I know that whenever I say that, folks like Dan Henn, who's the vice chair of the Z359 committee, always slaps my hand and says, Thom, nearly all of them, if not all of them, are preventable. But when it comes to implementing it in a prevention through design manner, that's where we get our biggest bang for our buck. That's where we can make a very strong financial argument with the designers involved, with the folks within the C-suite of our organizations, to show that not only will this make it a safer circumstance, but it could actually save us money, the organization money, by having these alternative procedures. And I would say that this area is probably one of the areas where I see the biggest difference between our regulations here in the U.S. and that over in the United Kingdom. In the United Kingdom, they have what they call their construction and design, CDM, Construction Design Management Regulations. And what it requires is that the owner of the facility, in essence, manages the safety associated with the life cycle of that structure. And in essence, it's the same thing that we call prevention through design, but it's mandatory. It's regulated over there, and that is one area that I think has significantly reduced their number of fatalities by forcing them to think about the life cycle of a project to make sure that the employees are protected, not just in fall protection, but all the areas when it comes to protecting the employees. So as we finish up, there's going to be some demographic questions just to get some information. This is not asking information that will be able to identify who you're at, but we want to get some information so that we can better understand who's answering these questions and other items. And then at the end of the survey, if you're interested, this is very, very key. We want people, if you are willing to share this information, that you'll be able to consider providing your contact information at the separate and confidential link. CPWR is really, really focused on helping out the worker, and this is one way that they want to make sure that they provide an opportunity for people that have information. We're decoupling the survey results from who you're identifying at that confidential link if you want to have a deeper level discussion with somebody. And so I think it's a critical item. I was so excited when Jess told me how we were going to be able to do this in the survey, and I think this is a great opportunity to take the survey results and get a very, very clear understanding and information on other items related to these incidents out there in the field. What we're looking at for the timeline for this is we're developing and we're testing the online version. We're using a program called Qualtrics. I'll let Jess talk more about that because that's more of along the lines as far as what she does. We're going to spend January through March collecting the responses. And what that does is it allows us to have it open for quite a while and allows us to continue to publicize it and so forth to get great information. And then we'll spend the time in April to May analyzing results. And what I'm excited, and hopefully I'm not jinxing Jess in any way by this, but the normal OSHA stand down in May, hopefully we'll have some basis of this information that we can start to share with during that stand down and start to use it in a positive way to better protect our workers at heights. And obviously from May onward, that's where we're sharing the information throughout our various industry groups. And so when we finish up, how to take or share the survey, we have this link there. I know that I plan on publicizing it through LinkedIn. There's going to be a lot of social media aspects of this. We're going to get publicized as much as possible, but we can't do it without you. And this is our ask of everyone that's on there on this, is that if you know people that were that fit the category of either were involved in a serious injury, they witnessed it, they investigated it, or they have some great information that they can share, please make sure that we pass this along. The more eyes that we see on this survey, the more survey results that we'll get, and the better data we'll start to be able to sift through and figure out, again, what are those interventions that we need to do to better protect our workers at heights. And so, as we finish up, we have these other relevant resources that we can do to better understand, or that you can take from this presentation and apply to your organization. Again, several that Jessica mentioned. There's several that I mentioned. That middle one on the MSHA fatality report. That's in essence what we're shooting for. We're trying to start to get better data, and this is our first step at getting that better data. There's great information in the Z359 fall protection code. I'm not only saying that because I'm the chair, but I've been using that code for more than 25 years, and I think it's just critical. And then finally, a couple of the documents from the United Kingdom that I think have been very critical in my understanding as far as how to better protect our workers at heights, and I want to make sure that you have those items along with you. So, Jess, I'm going to go ahead and hand it back to you, and we'll see what kind of questions we have and how we can finish up the survey. So, Jess, back to you.
Thanks, Thom, and I've actually been feeding questions to Chris. So, Chris, you can go ahead and get us started on the Q&A, please. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jessica. And thanks for sharing that information, Thom. You really did well on the fly of taking over for Jane. So we are excited about the survey and what we find out from it. I'm going to start with actually a couple of questions that were similar that came in live, so I don't forget them because I think it's important. They relate to the UK data that you shared, and the questions are really about, are they rates, or how do the rates compare? Can we compare them directly? Because it wasn't clear from the slide. There you go. Can you talk a little bit about the rates, or because of the large population difference between the two countries?
Yeah, I apologize. I don't have that. That's something I can definitely look into getting to share that. But yeah, that is obviously critical information that we need to look at to compare the rates. But I don't have that off the top of my head, so I can follow up on that.
All right, great. So we can include that in the follow-up email to the webinar participants. So. Yes. And then some of the questions that came in before the webinar during the registration process, I'm going to go to now. So one question is, should OSHA require contractors to mitigate fall risk prior to even using a personal fall arrest system? So around holes or skylights or hole coverings, where coverings or rails would eliminate the hazard versus trying to control it with a PFAS?
So the short answer to that, Chris, is absolutely. The challenge is, and I say absolutely because, fundamental in the occupational safety profession and in anything is the hierarchy of controls. If we can eliminate or substitute a hazard that's more effective and less defeatable than using an engineering control, which is more effective and less defeatable than using personal protective equipment. And so that's just a fundamental that we know from any design-related item, and especially when it comes to our safety controls. However, that's not an item that's currently, from my understanding, in OSHA's span of citations when it comes to looking at those situations. But that's one fundamental difference between the United States and the United Kingdom, is that the health and safety executive in the United Kingdom, so their version of OSHA, can actually cite an organization for using a less safe alternative. So I'll use a construction example. Say somebody's walking structural steel or doing some steel erection. And in one circumstance, you have the person that's walking the steel. So they could be using just a full body harness with some sort of a lanyard or maybe a leading edge self-retracting device. Maybe they have a beamer on top of the top flange, or maybe worse off, they have some sort of a cheater cable, versus somebody using an articulating boom lift to do the structural steel erection. So in the United Kingdom, if they see somebody that's working or walking steel where they could be using an articulating lift, that contractor can be cited for using a less safe alternative. Now, in OSHA, what they typically say is that all the solutions they give are equally safe, but according to the hierarchy of control, we know that they're not. And so while I would like that to happen, should OSHA require contractors to mitigate risk before using a personal follower system? Absolutely, they should, but I don't necessarily see that happening in the near future. So I think that's something that, as organizations, as maybe the general contractor or the construction manager or the owner, that's where they have to step up and not bring that regulatory framework from the UK over here, but take that best practice and how can we implement it to make sure that the hierarchy and control is within our specifications, is within our expectations when it comes to the contractors on site. Chris?
Great. So then there's some questions related to kind of individual characteristics of employees and what types of connections could they be, quote unquote, responsible for falls, things like physical condition, mental condition, psychological. I've also got the use of medications in another question, and older workers with chronic conditions. Is there any kind of response you have to that question? You know, how do we attribute things to a worker's individual conditions, or are there, you know, any themes that you want to share about those types of issues?
Sure. Yeah. Getting into those human factors, there's a lot to peel away on that onion to try to understand what's responsible to the fall at height. I think one item that we've been seeing in the construction industry, and it's probably been made even worse due to COVID, is just the mental condition of some of our construction workers out there, and it's just a challenging work situation that creates a significant amount of mental strain on them, and how that contributes to the falls. We know it does, but we don't know the level of it, and so that's where I know that the U.S. Navy, Sean Smith, who represents NAVSEA and the United States Navy on the ANSI Z359 Committee, and he's on the Work at Height Task Force. He always talks about HVACs, the human factors program through the U.S. Navy that's very well known and gets into a number of items. I'm not at my desk right now because right next to my computer on my desk when I'm at the office, I have the pamphlet that he gave me just because I find it such a tremendous resource. I unfortunately don't have it with me right now, but that provides a lot of information to look at all those different factors and better understand how they may have contributed to the incident, because we might be able to address one of those factors and mitigate the fall, but there's a lot of different and interrelationship between those factors, and we have to realize, with our aging employees, with the physical, mental, psychological condition of our workers, all those factors we need to take into account, in addition to the actual physical hazards and the PPE and the worksite conditions that we need to take into account. So it's a very, very complex situation. I wouldn't say it's very complicated. It's definitely complex, and there's different ways that we can address these, and we're just trying to find how to best address them through the survey. So, Chris, back to you.
Chris, just a quick comment to build off what Thom was just saying about it being very complex and difficult to address. We have talked about this with regard to the survey, and there has been some debate on sort of how to include these things as contributing factors without blaming the victim or anything like that. And so I do think we will give it some more thought. And we've gotten some feedback related to incorporating items like worker fatigue. And so I will be doing another update of this survey overall to better get at those things while also remaining sensitive to the issue. So just wanted to mention that. Thanks.
Yeah, that's really helpful because when you talk about worker fatigue, there's often a cause for worker fatigue. That's not necessarily the cause of a fall. So really digging down and asking why kind of leads me to this next question, Thom. It's from someone who works in the nuclear industry doing root cause analysis. And when this individual looks at an incident, they struggle to find a true root cause and generally see more contributing causes, like you mentioned. So how do you view a relationship between the root cause and a contributing cause?
Yeah, it's in my opinion that it's more of trying to look at trying to find as many contributing causes as possible, because I don't think that, especially the incidents I've investigated, there's not really one true root cause there, but there's obviously, some contributing causes that are more significant than others. And so trying to formulate what those are, because then once we have those contributing causes, then we can look at, okay, what do we need to change relative to our processes, our procedures, our supervision at site, our training on the sites in order to better address those. And so we're going to be able to see the links between those two and try to get those. And so I agree that I always struggle to find that true root cause, just because, was it the fitting of the harness? Was it, how the anchorages were identified? Was it the training that was the work was given? Was it the training of the competent person that was supervising that work at heights? All those items can be contributing causes, and there might not be that true root cause in many of the circumstances. One item that I often like to share in this circumstance that I hope that everyone on the call does in some way is, I think the one way that we can change the culture when it comes to using personal protective equipment is just to do, address one aspect of the fall protection system, and it's that full body harness. And when it comes to a full body harness, make sure that everyone you ever walk by, moving forward, always has a properly fit harness, that the leg straps are tight, that the dorsal D-ring is at that armpit level, that the chest D-ring is below the armpit level, but, above where the sternum is. And if every person that you walk by in the future that has a full body harness on, you look at, and if there's something wrong, that you address it in a proactive way, I think that can really change the culture when it comes to working at heights. And the reason why I believe that is if somebody is intentional about harness fitting, so they have, when they go through their training, they're professionally fit a harness, they go through a simulated suspension. If we go through those things, then they're going to be much more intentional about other aspects of their fall protection system, about the lanyards, about their anchorage, about rescue. And said in a negative way, if the worker isn't even being mindful about how they put on a harness and how they use the harness, and that's the most personal part of the personal fall arrest system, what chance do we have them being intentional about the lanyards, about the anchorage, about the rescue system, anything? And it's very likely. And so fundamentally, I think that's one thing that I'm hoping that one thing that people take away from this program is that if we just focus on harness fitting, we can likely start to change a lot of the behaviors when it comes to overall fall protection systems out there. So I kind of took that answer in a little bit different way at the end there. So Chris, back to you for another question. Chris?
Okay. So this is a kind of a specific question. The person says the misuse of retractable lanyards is common. Is there, any consideration to color coding different types of retractables?
Yeah, great question. And I think what they're indicating is 3M, obviously a well-known manufacturer of personal protective equipment, for their leading edge devices. I think all their leading edge devices have orange on the device in order to differentiate it from their standard product. And I think it's a great item. The challenge with the ANSI Z359 standards is that it gets into items that some manufacturers find very important. And so we haven't gotten to the point, we haven't focused on changing of the color units, but we are standardizing icons and other aspects associated with the labeling in order to make a positive view and make things more recognizable for the worker out there in the field. The other thing we always have to keep in mind is that, some of the workers out there, and I'm not sure exactly on the percentage, some of the workers are colorblind, and so it's not a one item as far as, changing the color, and that would address everything, but we need to be thinking sometimes about icons and so forth, and so there's going to be some items with the new Z359.14 standard that Dan Henn from Reliance Fall Protection is working on right now. We should have that. I've got my fingers crossed that'll be published in the first quarter of 21. but there are going to be some nice labeling items that I think are going to allow the workers to better differentiate. It won't necessarily be color coding because of some of the reasons I talked about, but we are looking at how do workers better differentiate between those equipment, because as the person who asked the question clearly indicated, there have been some misuses of those, and there's some very well-known fatalities that happened in the Pacific Northwest where people used the wrong devices on a leading-edge fall, and the device got severed, and the worker fell down to their death. And those are preventable items that we should be addressing, and we will be addressing in the future. Chris, back to you.
Okay, and here's another question for Z359. What about suspension trauma? Is it a required component for a full body harness? Will it be addressed in 359?
I think when they say suspension trauma in the full body harness, I think they're referring to, I'm just guessing here, but probably the suspension trauma straps. So these are the straps that, nearly all the manufacturers have them. I think it will likely be something, maybe not in the new version that Rob Willis from MSA is working on right now, but I would say in the near future, that is something that is going to be addressed. So the update to the 0.11 standard for full body harnesses is more of a maintenance update right now, taking care of some specific areas where we know the standard needs to be improved. In the future, I foresee there being a more significant item addressing, common sizing between the manufacturers, addressing different body shapes, making sure that it's easier for different body shapes to be fitted in full body harnesses. And this might be another item that we can push for. So what I would encourage the folks out there is get involved in the ANSI Z359 standards. Even if you're not on the committee, you can still submit during the public review and provide a comment, such as items like this, making sure that harness suspension trauma straps are on every full body harness. The one item I'll leave you with when it comes to suspension trauma straps, just as I talked about with relative to the full body harness, and I asked this question about in front of 200 construction workers. I said, raise your hand if you have suspension trauma straps on your harness, and about half the group, proudly raised their hand. And I said, keep your hand in the air if you've ever trained on the proper use of them. Now, this was about 2 years ago, but all about 5% kept their hands in the air. And the point is that you could have that suspension trauma strap, but some of the incident investigation reports that I've read indicate that even though the worker had those on their harness when they went through a fall, they had never used them before, so they never deployed them and they never utilized them while they were suspended. And so they are very important, but they need to be part of that simulated suspension that you do in training so that the worker knows how to do it. The way I like to describe it is I'd rather a worker go through a simulated suspension and use those trauma straps where they're 6 inches off the ground or simply just picking their feet up versus 60 feet in the air, because you don't know how that worker's going to react when if the first time they go through a fall, an impact, and the suspension is 60 feet in the air, and that's a bad day if you don't understand how they're going to react. That's why you need to have it incorporated into your training in a very non-threatening 6 inches or simply just picking their feet up off the ground. Chris, back to you.
Well, with that, I think I'm going to wrap up because we're just past the hour. Thom, before last year, I think, was the first time we did kind of like a fireside chat with Thom with a lot of technical questions and answers, and I'd like to invite you back to do another go of that in the next quarter for CPWR, if you're amenable, because we do have so many important questions that we didn't get to today, both that have come in through the chat, the Q&A, and before the webinar. So
We'd love to.
I'd like to
for sure.
invite you and another expert you identify to come in and answer some of these questions in the future as soon as we can arrange it and when it fits with everybody's schedule. So with that, I just wanted to say thank you, and thank you, Jessica, and thank you, Jane, if you can hear me, and thank you, Thom, for the great webinar today. And thanks, everyone who participated. Have a great afternoon.
Take care, everyone. Be safe and stay healthy.